You really dragged that onto this stage in front of all these people?
Pennington pointed at Faith's charred violin.
Girl, humiliating. That thing looks like it crawled out of a house fire.
The audience laughed. 800 seats. Not one person stopped them.
Everyone here trained at Juilliard. Curtis, Eastman. And you? What, you trained at a bus stop?
Please, just let me play.
Oh, she's begging now.
He smiled.
Go ahead then. Play us what $40 sounds like.
She lifted the bow. What came out of that charred violin next? It wasn't music, and nobody in that room laughed again. Crazy, right? But this moment didn't come out of nowhere. It started 6 weeks ago in an auction room full of people who bet against her. Whitfield & Sons, Nashville's oldest estate auction house. Crystal chandeliers, velvet chairs, the kind of room where money whispers and everyone pretends not to listen. Gerald Whitfield stood behind the podium and opened to lot number 112. He almost skipped it. Almost. But procedure is procedure. A violin, recovered from the Beaumont estate fire, 1987. He paused. Let the room read between the lines. Opening bid? $40. He said it the way a waiter says tap water. Technically available. Not recommended. Douglas Pennington, front row, silk pocket square, third-generation antiques dealer, turned to the couple beside him. $40 for a cremated Stradivarius. Shall I bid, or shall we skip straight to the eulogy? Laughter. Big, confident, expensive laughter. The kind that comes from people who've never been on the wrong side of it. Then a voice from the back row stopped it cold. $40. Not loud, not angry, just certain. The way someone says their own name. 800 heads turned. Faith Carter sat in the last row. Gray hoodie, canvas backpack, Greyhound ticket folded in her pocket. Memphis to Nashville, 3 hours, one way. 21 years old, $43 to her name. Gerald blinked. We have $40 from the young lady in the back. No paddle moved. Nobody wanted to compete for a joke. Going once. Going twice. The gavel cracked, fast, sharp, the sound of a door slamming on a room that had already moved on. Sold. Faith walked to the front, set 2 20s on the counter, bills so soft they barely made a sound, picked up the case, held it close. The way someone holds something that still has a heartbeat. Pennington watched her pass. He leaned out, arm draped over the velvet chair. Word of advice. Next time you want to throw away money, at least buy something that isn't already dead. Faith didn't look at him, didn't slow down, pushed through the glass doors and stepped into the Nashville sun. The light hit the cracked case. For one breath, the charred wood underneath flickered. Not dull, not dead. Like an ember that forgot to go out. Nobody inside noticed. They were already clapping for lot number 113. But Faith noticed. She held the case tighter, and something deep inside the burned wood hummed. Low, quiet, waiting. Like it had been waiting for a long time. Faith Carter grew up on Lamar Avenue, South Memphis. The kind of street where the sidewalks crack before the kids do. Where front porches sag under the weight of too many years and not enough paint. Where music leaks out of screen doors at all hours. Gospel, blues, soul. Because when you can't afford therapy, you sing. Her mother, Diane, worked 2 shifts at the packaging plant off Airways Boulevard. Morning shift, night shift. The in-between was for sleeping, not parenting. Not because she didn't care, because the bills didn't care either. Faith's father left when she was 3. No note, no forwarding address, just a gap at the kitchen table that Diane filled with a second coffee mug turned upside down, as if he might come back for it. But there was Eleanor. Eleanor Carter, Faith's grandmother, was the kind of woman who made a room feel bigger just by walking into it. 71 years old, hands like weathered oak, a voice that could hush a crying baby or stop a grown man mid-sentence. She had played violin since she was 9 years old, taught by a church musician in rural Alabama who saw something in her fingers before she even knew what a fingerboard was. Eleanor never performed on any stage that mattered. No conservatory would take a black girl from Alabama in 1962. No orchestra would audition her. So she played where she was welcome. Mount Zion Baptist Church Sunday mornings, community centers on Friday nights, front porches when the weather was kind. But the sound she made, Lord, the sound. People on Lamar Avenue still talk about it. The way Eleanor's violin could make the air thicker. The way it turned a Tuesday evening into something sacred. Old men who hadn't cried in decades would sit on her porch steps and let the tears come without wiping them. That's what her music did. It gave people permission to feel. She started teaching Faith when the girl was 6. Not with theory books or finger charts, with stories. You hear that note? That's a question. And this one? That's the answer. Music is just a conversation, baby, between you and whoever's listening. Faith took to it like breathing. By 8, she could hear a melody once and play it back with her eyes closed. By 12, she was adding her own phrases, blues bins, gospel runs, things Eleanor had never taught her but recognized immediately. "That's yours," Eleanor would say, smiling. "That part right there. That's all you." They played together every evening. Eleanor on her old violin, a battered instrument she'd carried from Alabama in a flour sack, and Faith on a 3/4-sized student model they'd found at the pawn shop for $35. 2 violins on a sagging porch, Memphis heat, fireflies, the smell of magnolia and motor oil. It was the safest place Faith ever knew. Then Eleanor died. Heart failure. Quick and quiet. The way she did everything except play music. Faith was 17. 3 weeks after the funeral, a fire broke out in the community storage building on Trigg Avenue. Electrical fault. The building held belongings from a dozen families. Furniture, photo albums, old clothes, and Eleanor's violin. By the time the trucks arrived, the roof had caved in. Everything inside was ash or charcoal. They pulled out Eleanor's violin case 2 days later. The case was destroyed. The violin inside was charred along the left bout. The varnish blistered. 2 strings melted away. Faith held it in the parking lot of the fire station. Held it and didn't cry. Didn't scream. Just stood there, feeling the weight of it. Lighter now. Hollowed out by heat, like grief had a specific gravity. She put the violin in her closet, closed the door, didn't touch an instrument for 4 years. She waited tables at a diner on Beale Street, folded sheets at a laundromat on 3rd, paid rent, bought groceries, did what needed doing. But at night, every night, her left hand would move on the edge of the mattress, fingers pressing invisible strings, shifting positions on a neck that wasn't there. The muscle memory of a life she'd walked away from, still alive in her tendons, still humming. Just like the violin in the closet, burned, silent, but not dead, never dead. She found it on a Tuesday. Faith was wiping down the counter at May's Diner. The lunch rush had cleared, and the smell of bacon grease hung in the air like a permanent resident when her phone buzzed. A notification from an estate sale app she'd downloaded months ago and mostly forgotten. She'd set one alert, one keyword: violin. The listing read, Whitfield & Sons Estate Auction, Nashville, Tennessee. Lot number 112. Violin. Origin unknown. Recovered from Beaumont Estate Fire, 1987. Condition: damaged. Opening bid: $40. She stared at the screen, read it again, then a third time. Beaumont Estate Fire, 1987. The same year, Eleanor's church musician mentor, the man who first put a violin in her grandmother's hands in Alabama, had moved to Nashville. The same year, he died in a house fire that took his entire collection. Faith had heard the story 100 times. Eleanor told it like scripture. Mr. Amos had 7 violins. 7! Each one had a name. And when that fire took his house, it took every last one of them. That's the day the music in Nashville lost a piece of itself. 7 violins, all lost. Or so everyone thought. Faith's hands were shaking when she checked her bank account. $43.19. Rent was due in 6 days. She had a bus ticket to buy, a 3-hour ride each way, and no guarantee that lot number 112 was anything more than a piece of burned wood shaped like a memory. She bought the ticket anyway. The Greyhound left Memphis at 6 in the morning. Faith sat by the window with her backpack on her lap and watched Tennessee scroll by. Flat fields, gas stations, churches, the slow greening of highway shoulders in early spring. She didn't listen to music. Hadn't in 4 years. The silence had become a habit. And habits are harder to break than bones. Nashville's bus station smelled like diesel and floor cleaner. She walked 14 blocks to Whitfield & Sons because the cab fare would have eaten half her bid money. By the time she reached the auction house, a limestone building with brass doors and the kind of quiet that only money can buy, her sneakers had a new hole and her hoodie was damp with sweat. The receptionist, Victoria Hale, looked up from behind a marble counter. Blonde, pressed blouse, a smile that was technically a smile. "Can I help you?" "I'm here for the auction." Victoria's eyes traveled down. Hoodie, backpack, sneakers with no laces. They traveled back up, slowly, as if completing an inspection she'd already failed. "The auction is by registration only. Do you have your paddle number?" "I registered online. Faith Carter." Victoria checked the list, found the name. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise exactly. More like the face you make when a wrong answer shows up in the right place. "Row 40, last section, to your left." Faith walked in. The grand room swallowed her. 800 seats, most of them filled with people who looked like they'd been born in rooms like this. She found her seat, last row, far left, folding chair, not velvet. Even the seating had a class system. The auction moved fast. Lot after lot, porcelain, silverware, oil paintings, furniture, sold for numbers that made Faith's chest tight. 3,000. 7,000, 14,000 for a writing desk, numbers that existed in a different universe from hers. Then Gerald Whitfield reached lot number 112. He paused. Not the dramatic pause of a showman, the pause of a man who'd rather skip ahead. A violin, recovered from the Beaumont estate fire. He glanced at the charred instrument on the display table. Condition, well, you can see for yourselves. Opening bid, $40. The laughter came fast. Not cruel exactly. more like reflexive, the sound a room makes when it doesn't know what else to do with something that doesn't fit. But Faith wasn't listening to the laughter. She was looking at the violin. The char was heavy on the left side. The varnish was gone in patches, replaced by a rough, blackened skin. 2 strings were missing. The scroll at the top was intact. And that's what caught her breath. The scroll had a particular curve, a slight flattening on the left spiral that Eleanor had once described to her in detail. Mr. Amos's violins all had that mark, his maker's signature. Not on the label, on the scroll. You'd only know it if someone told you. Someone had told Faith 1,000 times. Her hand went up. $40. The rest, the laughter, the gavel, Pennington's comments, the walk to the front, the 2 soft 20s on the counter, the glass doors, the Nashville sun. She barely registered any of it. Her mind was somewhere else entirely. She was doing the math. 1 violin, rescued from a fire in 1987. A scroll that matched a story told on a Memphis porch by a woman who'd been dead for 4 years. What if lot number 112 wasn't just a burned violin? What if it was the last piece of a legacy that everyone else had given up on? Faith held the case against her chest and walked toward the bus station. 14 blocks. New hole in her shoe. Didn't feel it. She had something that mattered more than comfort. She had a reason to play again. The bus back to Memphis was half empty. Faith sat in the same window seat, the violin case on her lap, and watched the highway lights slide by like slow-moving stars. She didn't open the case. Not yet. She wanted to be home first. Whatever was about to happen between her and this instrument, it needed to happen in private. Her room was a 12 by 10 rectangle on the 2nd floor of Lorraine Webb's house on Spotswood Avenue. 1 window. 1 radiator that worked when it wanted to. A mattress on a metal frame. A folding table she used as a desk, a dinner table, and sometimes an ironing board. The walls were bare, except for 1 photograph. Eleanor, on the porch, violin tucked under her chin, eyes closed, smiling at something only the music could see. Faith set the case on the table, unlatched it. The hinges groaned. The violin lay in the ruined felt like a patient on an operating table. Charred. Cracked in 2 places along the lower bout. The remaining strings, A and D, were dull and oxidized, coiled loosely around pegs that had warped in the heat. She picked it up. Lighter than she expected. Fire eats density. What remained was a skeleton of spruce and maple, fragile and warm to the touch. She started that night, a paring knife from the kitchen, a bottle of linseed oil she bought for $3 at the hardware store, cotton rags torn from an old t-shirt. She worked under the desk lamp, scraping the char in slow, careful strokes, the way a surgeon removes dead tissue to find what's still alive underneath. Layer by layer, the black gave way. First, the grain appeared. Tight, straight spruce on the top plate, the mark of quality wood, aged and resonant. Then the maple on the back and ribs emerged, flame maple, with a ripple pattern that caught the light like water. Whoever had built this violin had chosen their wood the way a painter chooses canvas, with intention, with love. Faith worked for 5 hours that first night. Her fingers cramped. Her eyes burned from the lamp. She didn't stop. By the 3rd night, the body was clean. Not beautiful. The scars were permanent. The varnish gone in patches. The wood discolored in places where the heat had penetrated deepest. But the shape was there. The curves. The F-holes, still elegant despite the damage. And the scroll. That scroll with its telltale flattened spiral gleamed under the oil like it had been waiting for someone to look. She bought new strings, $12. Tomastic Dominance, the only set the music shop on Union Avenue carried that she could afford. She sat on the edge of the mattress, threaded each string through the tailpiece, wound the pegs slowly, tuning by ear the way Eleanor had taught her. Never use a machine to tune, baby. Your ear is better than any machine, because your ear knows what the music is supposed to feel like. A machine only knows what it's supposed to sound like. The E string tightened. The A string found its center. The D string settled. The G string, the deepest, the one that lives in the chest, locked into place with a resonance that vibrated through Faith's collarbone. She drew the bow across the open G. One note. The sound filled the room the way water fills a glass, completely, instantly, with nowhere left to go. Deep, warm, rich in a way that didn't match the instrument's appearance, like hearing a cathedral organ come out of a burned shoebox. Faith's breath caught. She played the open D, then A, then E. 4 strings, 4 voices, each one clear, each one full, each one carrying a weight that a $12 set of strings had no business producing. It wasn't the strings. It was the wood. Whatever this instrument was, wherever it had come from, whoever had made it, the fire had not killed it. The fire had stripped it down to its essence, and what was left was pure. She played Amazing Grace, Eleanor's arrangement, the one with the blue notes in the second verse and the gospel run at the bridge. Her fingers remembered before her brain did. 4 years of silence, and the muscle memory came flooding back like a river breaking through a dam. She cried, not the sobbing kind, the quiet kind. The kind where tears fall and you don't bother wiping them because your hands are busy doing something that matters more. Outside the door, Lorraine Webb stood in the hallway in her bathrobe. She had come upstairs to complain about the noise. It was past midnight. She had work in the morning. But she didn't knock. She stood there, listened, pressed her palm flat against the door as if she could feel the vibrations through the wood. When the song ended, Lorraine whispered, to no one, Lord have mercy. That girl. That sound. She went back downstairs, didn't say a word to Faith, didn't need to. Some things don't need explanation. They just need a witness. Nah, stop. Imagine. You haven't played in 4 years. You're broke, and you just spent your last $40 on a burned violin. And the first thing you play makes your landlady cry through the door? That's not practice. That's a gift refusing to die. 3 weeks. That's how long Faith had before the Nashville Young Artists Showcase. She found the poster taped to the window of the music shop on Union Avenue, the same shop where she'd bought the strings. A glossy flyer with gold lettering and a photograph of the Schermerhorn Symphony Center that looked like it belonged in a different country from the one she lived in. First prize, $10,000 and a full scholarship to the Vanderbilt School of Music. Faith read it twice, folded the flyer into her back pocket, walked home in the rain. That night, she recorded her audition video on a phone with a cracked screen. The lighting in her room was bad, one desk lamp throwing hard shadows across the wall. The sound quality was worse. But she played Brahms's Hungarian Dance No. 5 with a looseness that made it sound less like a performance and more like a conversation she was having with someone who wasn't in the room anymore. She uploaded it at 2 a.m, sitting on the floor with her back against the radiator, and tried not to think about what she'd just done. Professor Alan Hargrove, chair of the Vanderbilt Strings Department and head judge of the showcase, watched the video 3 times. The first time, he frowned. The audio was muddy. The video was dark. The instrument looked wrong, damaged. The second time, he closed his eyes and just listened. The third time, he forwarded it to his colleague with a one-line note. Either this is extraordinary or I need to retire.
Faith got the email on a Thursday. She was halfway through a double shift at the diner. She read it in the walk-in cooler, standing between crates of lettuce, breath coming out in clouds. Congratulations! You have been selected as a finalist for the Nashville Young Artists Showcase. Please report to the Schermerhorn Symphony Center for rehearsal on... She read it 4 times. Then she put her phone in her apron, walked back to the floor, and finished her shift. Smiled at customers, refilled coffees, carried plates. Didn't tell anyone. Not because she wasn't happy, because she didn't want to jinx it. Some good news is too fragile to say out loud. The first rehearsal nearly broke her. 12 finalists. 11 of them were conservatory students. Juilliard, Peabody, Curtis, Eastman. They arrived with instrument cases that cost more than Faith's rent. They wore rehearsal clothes that looked like they'd been chosen by stylists. They warmed up with scales that sounded like polished glass. And then there was Faith. Hoodie, backpack, a charred violin in a case held together with duct tape. Stephanie Ashford noticed her first. Stephanie was the favorite. 22, blonde, Juilliard trained, daughter of a Nashville real estate developer. Her violin was a 1920s Guarneri copy worth $50,000. She played Paganini the way some people drive sports cars. Fast, flashy, technically perfect, and fully aware that everyone was watching. She walked past Faith's chair during warm-up, stopped, looked at the violin. Did something happen to it? It was in a fire, Faith said. Stephanie's mouth opened, closed. She glanced at the other finalists. Some of them were already looking, already whispering. And you're going to play it? Here? On that stage? That's the plan. Stephanie tilted her head, the way someone looks at a stain on a white tablecloth. Okay. Good luck with that. She walked away. The whispers followed her like a wake behind a boat. Faith's rehearsal time was cut short. A scheduling conflict, they said. Her practice room was reassigned. Another conflict. When she asked the stage manager about a sound check, he looked at a clipboard and said he'd get back to her. He didn't. She recognized the pattern. Not a conspiracy, just the quiet friction that happens when a system encounters something it wasn't designed for. A body rejecting a transplant. Slow, polite, effective. She called Lorraine that night from the parking lot of the Schermerhorn, sitting on a concrete barrier, the violin case between her knees. They don't want me here. Since when has that stopped you? Silence. Your grandmother played in churches that wouldn't let her walk through the front door. You think a fancy concert hall is going to be different? Faith didn't answer. She already knew the answer. She went back to Memphis. Lorraine cleared out the garage, moved the lawnmower, the paint cans, the boxes of Christmas decorations that nobody had opened in years. Hung a work light from the ceiling beam, put a folding chair in the center of the concrete floor. It ain't the Schermerhorn, Lorraine said, but the acoustics aren't bad. Faith laughed. The first time in weeks. She practiced there every night. 6 hours. Sometimes 7. Bach's Chaconne, the Partita No. 2 in D minor. One of the most demanding pieces ever written for solo violin. 15 minutes of music that contained everything. Grief, rage, tenderness, defiance, surrender, and resurrection. She didn't play it straight. She bent the notes,
added Memphis to the margins. Blues slides between the Bach phrases. Gospel trills with a score called for straight vibrato. Eleanor's voice woven into the German architecture like ivy on a cathedral wall. The last night before the showcase, she stood in front of the cracked mirror in Lorraine's bathroom, Charred Violin against her chest, eyes steady. "Grandma, this one's for you." The Scammahorn Symphony Center sits on 4th Avenue in downtown Nashville like a limestone promise. Columns, arched windows, a concert hall that seats 1,800 people and was designed to make every sound that enters it feel important. On the night of the showcase, it was full. 800 seats in the main section. Standing room in the back. Local press in the second row. A camera crew from the Nashville Arts Channel setting up in the balcony. The showcase had grown over the years from a university recital into one of the most watched young artist competitions in the South. Sponsors paid 5 figures for front row seats. Alumni of the Vanderbilt music program came back every year like it was a homecoming. Douglas Pennington was there. Not as a music lover, as a sponsor. His family's antiques firm had underwritten the showcase for the past 6 years. He sat in the front row, center section, with his wife and 2 business partners. Gold cufflinks. Program rolled loosely in his hand. He didn't read it. He never read the program. He was there for the networking, not the notes. Backstage, 12 finalists occupied a green room that smelled like rosin and nervous sweat. Garment bags hung on a rolling rack. Instrument cases lined the wall like expensive luggage at an airport gate. The room hummed with the low-frequency tension of people who had prepared for this moment their entire lives. Stephanie Ashford stood in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting the strap of a midnight blue gown. Her Guarneri copy rested in an open case lined with burgundy velvet. She ran her fingers across the strings absently, not warming up, just reminding herself they were there. She looked ready. She looked like she'd been born ready. Faith arrived through the side entrance. No garment bag, no stylist. She wore black pants, the only pair she owned without a hole, and a black blouse Lorraine had pressed for her that morning with an iron so old it hissed. The charred violin rode in its duct-taped case on her back. She found a folding chair in the corner of the green room, set the case on the floor, opened it. The charred body caught the fluorescent light, and for a moment it looked worse than it had in her apartment. Under these lights, next to these instruments, it looked like a prop from a disaster movie. She felt the stares before she saw them. 2 finalists glanced over, then away. One whispered to another. A cellist from Peabody actually walked closer, looked at the violin, and said, "Are you seriously going to—" before catching himself and walking back without finishing. Stephanie crossed the room. Slow, deliberate, the way someone approaches an accident on the highway. "You know," she said, loud enough for the room, "most people at least try to look like they belong." Faith looked up. "I'm not here to look like anything." Clearly, Stephanie's eyes went to the violin. "I just hope whatever that is doesn't fall apart on stage. That would be embarrassing. For everyone." Faith said nothing. She tuned the violin. The G string first, then D, A, E, each one finding its center in the noise of the green room like a voice cutting through a crowd. The competition started at 8. One by one, the finalists took the stage. The level was high. A cellist from Curtis played Elgar with a maturity that drew murmurs of approval. A violinist from Eastman delivered a Wieniawski scherzo that crackled with energy. The audience leaned in. The judges scribbled. Then, Stephanie. She walked out like she owned the stage. And maybe she did. Her family had paid for the lighting rig. She played Paganini's Caprice No. 24, the showpiece, the calling card, the piece every young violinist plays when they want the world to know they can do things with their fingers that most people can't. And she played it well. Technically. Flawlessly. Every note in its place, every passage clean, every shift precise. The audience applauded hard, standing ovation from the sponsor section. Pennington clapped, with the program still rolled in his hand, nodding like a man who had just confirmed what he already knew. Stephanie came off stage glowing. She set her violin down, looked at Faith, and smiled. The kind of smile that says, "Follow that." Faith was last. The stage manager touched her shoulder. "You're up." She stood, picked up the case, walked toward the stage entrance. The fluorescent hallway was 10 steps long but felt like 10 miles. She could hear the MC's voice through the wall. "Our final performer this evening, Faith Carter, unaffiliated, Memphis, Tennessee." Unaffiliated. No school, no teacher, no institution, just a name and a city. The curtain parted. Light hit her face. The Skirmerhorn stage was enormous. Polished hardwood. A single music stand, which she wouldn't use. A single spotlight, which found her immediately and held her like a pin holds a butterfly. She walked to center stage. 1,800 people. Every seat filled. The silence was the wrong kind. Not anticipation, but curiosity. The kind of silence that comes before a verdict. She pulled the violin from the case, held it up. The charred wood caught the spotlight, and the scars were visible from every seat in the house. The blistered varnish, the missing patches, the black edges where the fire had tried to erase it. Someone in the fourth row laughed. Short, quiet, but loud enough. Pennington leaned forward, squinted. Then his eyes widened. He recognized her, the girl from the auction, the girl with the $40 firewood. He turned to his wife and said something. She pulled out her phone. Faith set the violin on her shoulder, raised the bow. The room waited, not with respect, with the kind of attention people give a tightrope walker, half wanting her to make it, half waiting for the fall. The bow touched the string, and the Skirmerhorn Symphony Center disappeared. Not literally. The walls were still there. The 1,800 people were still sitting in their seats. The spotlight still pinned Faith Carter to the center of the stage. But something happened in the space between the bow and the string. Something that made the room forget it was a room. The chaconne begins with a single chord. D minor. 3 notes struck together, then released into a melody that Bach wrote in 1720 after returning from a trip to find his wife had died and been buried while he was away. It is, by most accounts, the loneliest piece of music ever composed for a solo instrument. 15 minutes of a man trying to say what words cannot. Faith played the opening chord, and the sound that came out of the charred violin was not what anyone expected. It was enormous. Not loud. Enormous. The way a canyon is enormous, deep and wide and full of echoes that don't belong to you. The spruce top vibrated with a resonance that filled the hall from the floor up, as if the sound were rising from the ground itself. The maple back projected it outward with a clarity that made every note feel like it was being played directly into each listener's ear. This was not a $40 violin. This was something else entirely. Faith moved into the first variation. Her fingers were sure, her bow arm was steady. But it was not the technique that silenced the room. It was what she was doing with it. She was telling a story. The Bach was there. Every note, every phrase, every structural element intact. But between the lines, around the edges, underneath the German precision, Faith had planted something else. Memphis. The blues bends she'd learned by ear on Beale Street. The gospel slides Eleanor had played on Sunday mornings at Mount Zion. The raw, bent, aching notes of a tradition that Bach never knew but would have recognized. Because grief sounds the same in every language. The first variation ended. The second began, faster now, more urgent. Faith's left hand moved up the fingerboard with a fluidity that made the shifts invisible. She wasn't playing the notes, she was speaking them. Each phrase was a sentence, each pause was a breath. The music had a pulse, and it was synced to something primal in the room. Professor Hargrove put his pen down. He'd stopped writing 3 minutes ago. His hand was flat on the judging table, pressing down, as if he needed to hold on to something solid. His co-judge, Dr. Miriam Holloway, had removed her glasses. She was not wiping her eyes. She was not blinking. She was trying to understand what she was hearing, and failing in the best possible way. In the front row, Pennington's wife had lowered her phone. The screen was dark. She'd forgotten she was holding it. Pennington himself had not moved. His rolled program sat in his lap, untouched. His jaw was set. His eyes were fixed on the stage, on the girl, on the burned violin he'd called firewood 6 weeks ago. Something was happening behind his expression. Not shame, not yet, but the first crack in the wall that shame eventually walks through. The chaconne shifted to D major. This is the passage that musicians call the light. After 10 minutes of darkness, of minor keys and grief and tension wound so tight it feels like the strings might snap, Bach opens a door, and light pours in. Faith played it like sunrise, not fast, not flashy. She slowed down, let each note breathe. The charred violin sang in the upper register with a sweetness that shouldn't have been possible from wood that had been through a fire. But fire does that sometimes. It burns away everything that isn't essential. What's left is pure. A woman in the 12th row pressed her hand to her mouth. Her husband reached for her other hand without looking. In the balcony, a cameraman who had been adjusting his focus stopped. His hand stayed on the lens, but his eye was no longer on the viewfinder. He was just watching. 1,800 people. Not one cough. Not one shifted weight. Not one phone screen lit. Silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty. It's full. Full of everything the music is saying that no one in the room has the words for. Faith returned to D minor for the final section. The grief came back, but it was different now. Not the grief of loss, the grief of understanding, of knowing that some things are beautiful precisely because they are broken, that the cracks are where the sound gets in. Her bow slowed. The final measures of the chaconne, a recapitulation of the opening theme, the same 3-note chord, but now carrying the weight of everything that came before it. Faith played it with her eyes closed, her chin pressed into the charred chin rest. Her body swayed slightly, not for show, but because the music was moving through her, and she was letting it. The last note, D, open string. She held it. Let it ring. Let the overtones bloom and decay naturally, filling the hall with a sound that faded so slowly it was impossible to tell where the note ended and the silence began. She lowered the bow. 3 seconds of absolute nothing. The kind of nothing that has texture, that has weight. Then the Schirmerhorn erupted. It didn't start with one person. It started everywhere at once, like a dam breaking. 1,800 people on their feet, applause so loud it felt physical, a wall of sound crashing against the stage. Someone in the balcony shouted, Someone else was crying and clapping at the same time, the way you do when your body can't decide which response is appropriate, so it chooses both. Stephanie Ashford stood in the wings. She was not clapping. She was not angry. She was holding her $50,000 Guarneri copy against her chest. And for the first time in her life, she understood the difference between playing an instrument and making it speak. Pennington stood, slowly. His hands hung at his sides. He did not clap. He just stood there, looking at the girl, looking at the violin, looking at the wreckage of every assumption he had ever made about what $40 could buy. The applause lasted 4 minutes. Faith stood at center stage, the charred violin at her side, and let it wash over her. She didn't bow at first, didn't know how. Nobody had ever taught her what to do when a room full of strangers decided you mattered. She bowed once, small, quick, the way Eleanor used to nod after playing at Mount Zion, not for praise, but out of respect for the moment itself. Backstage, it started immediately. Professor Hargrove found her before she'd even put the violin back in the case. His eyes were red. He didn't try to hide it. "Miss Carter, how long have you been playing?" "Since I was 6. My grandmother taught me." "And the piece, the chaconne, who coached you on it?" "Nobody. I worked from a recording, and some of it is mine." Hargrove was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that happens when someone is recalculating everything they thought they knew. "The passages that were yours," he said carefully. "The blues phrasing, the gospel elements, those were... I have to be honest with you. In 30 years of teaching at Vanderbilt, I have never heard anyone do what you just did with that piece. You didn't just play Bach. You had a conversation with him, and he answered." Faith held the violin tighter. She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. Then Thomas Whitmore arrived. Whitmore was 63, silver-haired, soft-spoken, one of the most respected instrument appraisers in the United States. He attended the showcase every year as a guest of the Vanderbilt Music Department. He had watched Faith's performance from the 5th row. He had not moved for 15 minutes. And now he was standing in the green room, asking if he could hold the violin. Faith hesitated, then handed it over. Whitmore turned it slowly. His hands were practiced, the hands of a man who had held instruments worth millions and could read their history through touch the way a geologist reads rock layers. He examined the F-holes, ran his thumb along the backplate, held it up to the light, and looked through the left F-hole at the interior. Then he saw the scroll, the flattened spiral on the left curve, and his hands stopped moving. "Where did you get this?" "An auction. Whitfield & Sons. 6 weeks ago." "How much?" $40. Whitmore set the violin on the table, carefully, the way you set down something that just changed the conversation. "This instrument was made by Etienne Vatelot." The name meant nothing to Faith. It meant everything to Hargrove, who took a step back like someone had pushed him. Vatelot, the French master luthier, restorer of Stradivari and Guarneris for the greatest soloists of the 20th century. A man who built a small number of his own instruments, fewer than 70 in his lifetime, each one a study in acoustic perfection. His violins were held in private collections, museums, and the hands of soloists who had waited years to acquire one. And one of them, number 44, completed in 1971, sold to a collector in Nashville who died in the house fire in 1987, had been missing for 39 years. Until a 21-year-old girl from South Memphis bought it at an estate auction for 2 $20 bills. Whitmore looked at Faith.
This violin is worth between $200,000 and $350,000, possibly more. The fire damage, paradoxically, may have enhanced the tonal qualities by altering the density of the top plate. It's one of the finest sounding instruments I've examined in 20 years. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a detonation. Pennington had entered the green room 2 minutes earlier. He'd come to congratulate Stephanie. Old money supporting old money, the usual circuit. Instead, he'd walked in on this. He stood near the door. He heard the number. 200,000. 350,000. For the thing he'd called firewood. For the thing he'd laughed at. For the thing he'd tried to humiliate a girl over in front of 800 people. Victoria Hale, the receptionist from the auction house, was not in the room. But somewhere in Nashville, in an apartment she rented on a salary that Pennington would have called modest, she would see the story on the news the next morning. And she would remember the girl in the hoodie and the inspection she had already failed. Faith picked up the violin, held it against her chest. "I didn't buy it because it was worth something," she said. "I bought it because it sounded like home." Faith won the Nashville Young Artist Showcase. Unanimous decision. 3 judges, not one dissenting note. The $10,000 prize paid off her rent, her bus tickets, and 4 years of tips she'd never been able to save. The scholarship to Vanderbilt's School of Music started the following September. Full ride. Tuition, housing, instrument maintenance, everything covered. She kept the violin. 3 dealers offered to buy it within a week of the showcase. The highest offer was $310,000. A collector from Geneva called twice. A museum in Vienna sent a formal letter of inquiry. Faith said no, every time, without hesitation. It's not for sale. It was never for sale. Professor Hargrove became her mentor. Not her teacher. He was careful about the distinction. "I'm not here to teach you how to play," he told her on the first day. "I'm here to make sure nobody gets in the way of what you already know." She studied at Vanderbilt for 4 years, graduated with honors, performed at the Kennedy Center during her junior year, the youngest soloist in the program's history. She played the chaconne, the same one, with the same charred violin. The Washington Post review called it a performance that rewrites the relationship between classical tradition and American roots music. She never sanded down the burn marks, never revarnished, never tried to make the violin look like something it wasn't. "The scars are part of the sound," she told an interviewer. "You take those away, you take away the story, and the story is the whole point." Stephanie Ashford finished 3rd at the showcase. She returned to Juilliard the following week. 2 years later, she transferred to Vanderbilt. She never said why publicly, but on the day she arrived, she knocked on Faith's practice room door, sat down, and said, "Teach me what you hear, because I've been playing my whole life and I've never heard it." They became collaborators, then friends. The kind of friendship that starts with competition and ends with respect. The rarest kind. Douglas Pennington sent a letter 3 weeks after the showcase. Handwritten. 2 paragraphs. No excuses, no justifications. Just an acknowledgement that he had been wrong, and a check for $5,000 made out to the Eleanor Carter Music Foundation. Faith cashed the check, used every dollar for instruments, violins, cellos, violas, for children in South Memphis who couldn't afford them. She did not write back. Some debts are paid by what you do next, not by what you say. Every Sunday, Faith drives to Memphis, takes I-40 west, 2.5 hours. She plays at Mount Zion Baptist Church, The same church where Eleanor played for 40 years. Same pew. Same light through the stained glass. Different violinist. Same sound. And on the porch of Lorraine Webb's house on Spotswood Avenue, on warm evenings when the air smells like magnolia and the streetlights are just coming on, Faith plays for the neighborhood. No stage, no spotlight, no tickets. Just a girl, a burned violin, and a sound that makes people stop walking and stand still. Lorraine sits in her folding chair by the door. She never misses it. "You know what I love about that girl?" she told a neighbor once. "She didn't try to become somebody else. She just became more of who she already was. And that violin, that burned up, written off, laughed at violin, it did the same thing." What's the one thing people laughed at you for that turned out to be your greatest gift? Drop it in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe, because stories like this one don't find you twice. Man, I can't even. $40. 40. The whole room laughed. And now that